Hello. Thank you for joining us today for the 13th episode of Nima Voices, which is a virtual interview series. My name is Mia Barnett. I'll be your guest co-host today, host today, and I'll be interviewing Alden, who I will introduce in just 1 second. My pronouns are she and her. I am the co-chair for Okaeri, which is an LGBTQ plus Nikkei community. And before we start the program, I'd like to briefly introduce Discover Nikkei project and the Nima Voices series. Discover Nikkei is the Japanese American National Museum's international community-based web project with major funding from the Nippon Foundation, launched in 2005. The site is in 4 languages: English, Japanese, Spanish, and Portuguese, and shares unique Nikkei stories from around the world, from throughout the US, Brazil, Japan, Peru, Canada, Argentina, Mexico, and other countries around the world. New stories are published daily on the website. Nima are members of the Discover Nikkei online community. Hailing from all over the world, they each bring unique experiences and perspectives to the site's rich archive of stories. And Nima Voices is an interview series where we uplift our Nima through brief but enlightening interviews. And in this 13th episode, I will be talking with Alden Hayashi, a Sansei writer originally from Hawaii and now living in Boston. Discover Nikkei has been sharing articles by Alden since 2021. We'll be chatting about his family history, why he decided to shift from writing about science, technology, and business to writing fiction to preserve stories of the Nikkei experience, his first novel, and his sense of identity as a gay Nikkei man, and more. After my conversation with Alden, I will be asking him some of your questions, so please use the chat feature to ask questions at any time, and I'll get to a few of them at the end. You do have to be logged in to use this feature. And we'll also be sharing links to the articles that we mentioned in the chat. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Alden, thank you so much for joining me here today. Just to get started, where are you from originally?
Oh, yeah, from Honolulu. And first of all, thank you to the Discover Nikkei folks who have been kind enough to publish a lot of my essays and for hosting this. And thank you, Mia, for hosting this. So I was born in Honolulu, Hawaii, born and raised there, and lived there until I was 18 and moved to LA for college.
What was it like growing up in Hawaii?
It was great. I mean, it really was idyllic. It was like a Norman Rockwell kind of a upbringing, with an Asian flavor, though. It's Hawaii, right? But where I grew up, we played with our neighbors' kids. We had a gang. We had a bike gang. We would ride our bikes around. There were no set play dates or whatever. When you had free time, you'd go out on the street, and there were always people playing, football or riding their bikes or whatever. And we could stay out until the sun set usually. Our parents, not that they were absent parents. I mean, especially not my parents, but they weren't worried. We could ride the bus from a very young age. I have 3 older brothers, and my eldest brother, would take us. We were young, and take the bus to downtown Honolulu to catch matinees on Saturdays. So it was that kind of very idyllic, very Norman Rockwell kind of a childhood. Yeah.
That's so lovely. It sounds like so rare nowadays, or maybe doesn't
Yeah.
even exist anymore.
Yeah.
That's so great. And then, so I understand now you live in Boston. So how did
Mhm.
you end up in Boston?
Yeah, so after I graduated from USC in LA, I worked for a couple years as an engineer, and I didn't like it, and I knew I had to change my career and do something differently. So I applied to grad school I got in at Boston University and studied journalism here. Mia, I thought I was going to be here a year and a half, and that was 40 something years ago. And you know how it is. You go to school here, and then you have contacts, and so I got my first job, through a contact here, and then of course I met my now husband, and that just all that inertia that you just end up staying
Yeah.
in the place, and it's hard to believe now when I think back. It's more than 40 years. Uh,
Wow. Yeah,
that
you
I-
really set down roots there, it
yeah,
sounds like.
yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask, did you always want to be a writer, or how did you come to that career path?
Well, I always liked writing. I loved two things as a kid. I liked writing and I liked playing my oboe. But both things my parents were against. They had very strong ideas of my brothers and me being, doctor, dentist, lawyer, engineer, scientist, and being in the arts or anything like that was just for them. They didn't want that. So I was never encouraged. Although I liked writing, I sometimes wrote for the school paper, and I always played in the school bands and in the Honolulu Youth Symphony. So those are my two passions. Yeah.
Oh, wow. You mentioned that your parents really wanted you to get into sort of a STEM career. Do you have some sort of idea on why they were pushing you in that direction?
Well, I think that at that time there were so few role models in the arts. And I remember, I have a very vivid memory. I used to watch the Boston Pops in Honolulu when I was a kid growing up there. And as I started to play the oboe, I got very interested in classical music. I would watch the weekly broadcast of the Boston Pops. It was on our local PBS station. And I remember, my parents were against me, majoring in music in college. One day, my mother just, she came in front of the TV and she said, Look at this orchestra. How many Asian Americans do you see? There were none. You know how orchestra broadcast, sometimes it's the long shot, but a lot of times if the flute has a solo, they'll do
They'll
close
zoom
up.
in,
Right?
right?
If the clarinet section has an important, they'll zoom in on and I never realized this before, but after she said that and she was standing there, I was watching. Okay, no Asians.
Wow.
So I think to them, that they just couldn't, and none of their friends as kids were in music or became writers, so they just couldn't picture it. Representation matters so much. Um,
Yeah, on so many
yeah,
different levels
yeah.
too.
And then
Right.
there were other reasons why I learned later why my mother was very against it. And we can talk later about that. But yeah, there are also other reasons. But I think
Yeah.
lack of representation was a huge one.
That makes sense. And so I understand you spent most of your career writing about science, technology, and business.
Mhm.
And then now you've shifted to writing about Nikkei experiences.
Yeah,
So can you share a little bit about what led to that shift and why you made that decision?
sure. I love science. I do love science. So I do kind of fit in that stereotype of the Asian American kid who loves STEM, and I was always pretty good at math. And yeah, I find math fascinating. I find science fascinating. I like technology. So I've written or edited about it maybe for 30 years of my career. But when you get down to it, and when I started slowing down and working just part time, and started to write, I realized I want to write about the Nikkei experience, about my grandparents who immigrated from Japan, and my parents, and what happened to my mother's family during the war. It's like this was my passion, Mia. This is what I like computers, I like science, I like math, but this is my passion. And and I feel like there are a lot of writers who can write about science brilliantly, and the latest thing now is AI, artificial intelligence. The last book I ghost wrote was on artificial intelligence. It's a good book, but there are a lot of writers who can do marvelous jobs writing about it. But there are not too many people who know my family, as well as I do. I'm an expert on my family, and I can write about it, and I can write things that only I can write, or my brother, or one of my brothers could write. Uh, I'm the expert here, and I like that. I like that, and I feel like it's. I have an important voice as part of the whole Nikkei tapestry,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why, yeah, I want to write. I want to write about the Nikkei experience.
Yeah, I think that's so powerful because I know that you talk about how your mother and a lot of people in the Nisei generation, they just didn't talk about camp or they didn't talk about
Mm.
their experiences growing up. So do you think that your sort of reaction to really want to share your family's story is in reaction to seeing how your parents sort of viewed their family history?
Uh, Definitely. Yeah, because when I first found out about the sort of the depth or the extent of the camps, and, these weren't just like summer camps, and I found out in high school more about it and what they really were. I have wanted to write about it and write more about it, and also the fact that my mother was so reluctant to talk about it, was a huge tip off that there's a lot that happened, that very momentous events happen, and why won't she talk about it? Why won't other Nisei and Issei talk about it? So I've wanted to do it for so long, and but Mia, in my 20s, I was just so busy trying to establish myself as a writer. Publishing is a tough career, and I was working long hours at different publications. And then I'm in my 30s, and then I'm in my 40s, and but it was really as my parents became elderly, and my father had Alzheimer's, and my mother had dementia. They both passed away. I realized that uh, these stories, they're going to die with my parents, and I don't want that. These are important stories, and it's not only important Japanese American Nikkei stories. These are important American stories. The whole immigrant experience, and what happened during World War II. This is American history, and I, especially after my mother passed. She passed in 2013. I gave myself a big kick in the butt and said, like, stop procrastinating and write, and just write, because you're not getting any younger, and you got to do it. You just got to write. So yeah, that was sort of for me, because I am a really good procrastinator. you know
Oh, I am too.
Given the opportunity, I can procrastinate. If there were gold medals for it, man, I'd be in the Olympics. But you know, her passing really affected me.
Yeah, I enjoyed so much learning about your relationship with your mother in particular through the articles that you've written. And there's one in particular that I wanted to bring up, Three Layers of Deception.
Mm.
And I thought it was you're so gracious in how you approach the story. And of course it's your mother. Of course you love her. So
Yeah.
but I think, maybe to an outsider it feels like it might be easy to be angry at,
Mm.
you know, not necessarily at your family, but just angry at the situation,
Mhm.
angry that this is how your family's story played out. So how did you come to, I guess, sort of at peace with, learning about what you call these layers of deception and getting to where you are now?
Mia, maybe in the beginning, I might have been a bit resentful that this history wasn't told to my brothers and me, and why wasn't it told? I mean, this is our family history. It's part of who we are. Um, and I think I might have been, but I gotta say, Mia, the more I learned and the older I got, I just cannot help but feel compassion and empathy and not just for my parents, but for all Nisei, all Issei. They, in general, I think they did the best they could under and at times under some very severely difficult situations. They did the best they could, but certain things just were unwavering. Their love for their children, and wanting to provide opportunities that they didn't have, and so the sacrifices they were willing to make, and the suffering, the gaman spirit, that what they could endure, for the future, for their children, for their grandchildren. Um, the older I get, the more I see that, and you cannot but feel, this just this love and compassion and empathy and sympathy, and and actually, a lot of guilt too, Mia. That uh, I don't know if you know Brian Niia of Densho, but yeah, he has this phrase. I love it. He said, I'm a spoiled Sansei. He says that about himself. And we talked once, and I said, well, I am right up there with you, being spoiled Sansei, like I did. And a lot of it because we didn't know what our parents and their grandparents went through, because they didn't tell us. And I just feel very spoiled, and very fortunate to have the parents and grandparents I did. But yeah, guilty in a way that yeah, my life is easy compared to that. And I have had the opportunities I've had. It's just compared to what my parents had. It's mind-boggling, really. In a generation that yeah.
Yeah. And I think that comes through so much in the articles you write about your mother, just the immense love that she had for you and your brothers, and the things that she may have kept from you were completely out of love and wanting you to be able to just live a really great life, right? And not
Yeah,
not have to be weighed down by whatever
yeah,
baggage she felt that it might give you.
yeah.
So, yeah, I thought that was so beautiful. Um, so I wanted to shift gears a little bit and talk about identity.
Mhm.
Not that we haven't been talking about it at all, but
Yeah.
so one of, or actually the first article that you shared on Discover Nikkei was about how you struggled connecting with your family as a gay and Japanese American man in your 20s. And it's entitled Finding My Way Home. And you said something in here that I thought was really interesting because I myself am also queer and Japanese American. And you said that earlier in your life, you thought of your sort of primary identity as JA, and you
Mhm.
also happened to be gay. And then as you got older, it was more your primary identity felt like as a gay man who also happened to be JA. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that article, Finding My Way
Yeah.
Home, and also just your journey with your identities.
Yeah. So actually, Mia, it's the reverse.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I apologize.
Yeah, and I can explain why. But yeah, in my 20s, as I was struggling to come out, I very much identified as a gay man. Um, and I think a lot of it was because I felt the most vulnerable as a gay man. So this is in the 80s, yeah, and it was at the height of the AIDS epidemic. And just the vitriol, being hurled against the gay community, then it's just really mind-boggling. Yeah, it was just a really hard time. I had a cousin, my father's brother's son, who was gay, older than I am, 15 years older, and he came down with AIDS and ended up passing away from AIDS-related uh, compl- complications. Um, and had friends passing away, and yeah, I just felt. I guess when you're threatened like that, I think I just identified with being a gay man. And I have to say too that joining gay groups or whatnot, people didn't care that I was Asian American. It just they don't care if you're Latino or black or whatever. You're a gay man, and yeah, we're sort of a community. Um, and to be honest, I didn't quite feel like that at the time with the Japanese American community, and a lot of it, might have been my own perception. Like it didn't feel that welcome as a gay man in the Japanese American community, and so I kind of it's kind of hard for me to admit it now, but I kind of turned my back to it, and I saw myself primarily as a gay man, and I happen to be Japanese American, uh, and then of course this is decades later. Now I got to say I feel more threatened as an Asian American than I do as a gay man. And this is throughout the Trump administration and with the COVID virus and all that. And um, I really feel that if I were to, walk out on the street here in Boston and go to, a neighborhood that maybe is a little rougher, that I would be more likely to be, assaulted because I'm Asian American than I would be uh, assaulted, gay bashed. So it's like a total 180 degrees from what it used to be. And so I guess because I feel more threatened as an Asian American, I identify more with it now. I'm Japanese American, and and by the way, I happen to be gay. Uh, and and also, alongside with that, though, Mia, is the fact that I think, the Japanese American, the Asian American community embraces more the LGBTQ community than it did decades ago. Um, so, yeah, and it's hard for me to talk about it at times because my father was very active in Hawaii, in the local. He's from Hiroshima, Kenya. He was very active in the Hiroshima Kenjin Kai, and was president, for a while. And I think he would have loved if I were, more into it at that time. And I just wasn't. And yeah, I have this memory, that painful memory that he asked me to help him with a speech that he had to give in English at one point. And it's hard for me to say, but I didn't care. He wanted me to look at the speech, edit it for him. I gave it kind of like a cursory glance and, like, oh, this, and give it back to him. And after that, he never asked me again. And he knows I'm I like words, I like to write, and I just, I think it pains me to say now, I think I made it clear that I just, you know, I wasn't interested in that speech and in helping him with it. Yeah, he never asked me again. Um,
Mm.
so and this is way back. I think I don't know. I probably was in my 30s then or so. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, it's so interesting how the way that you talk about identity is very much like how the world may perceive your identity, right? It seems like
Hmm.
you internally most deeply connect with whatever it feels like the world is first going to perceive about you. So,
Hmm. Yeah.
as you said, when you were younger, it was that you were a gay man, and then nowadays it's more so that you're Asian American, and I think that's so interesting. And um, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I did want to also touch on your first novel that you published in
Yeah.
2021, Two Nails, One Love, and you shared an excerpt on it, or excerpt from it on Discover Nikkei, and uh, we already talked about your decision to switch to writing fiction, but can you talk a little bit about your novel and what the story is about, who the characters are?
Yeah. What I the novel is very much inspired by my mother's family and what happened to her. And by now, I think there's a greater awareness among the general public about the concentration camps in World War II, about Manzanar and Tule Lake, and people kind of know, even the general public, but there's still things people don't know. And one misconception is that only West Coast ethnic Japanese were forcibly relocated and incarcerated. But no, there were I think roughly about 1,000 Japanese from Hawaii who were sent to a camp, and mainly the Jerome concentration camp in Arkansas. My mother's family was one of the lucky, among the 1,000 that were sent. But also, what is really not known is this really ugly, to me, really very, very heinous action of the U.S. government to exchange Japanese, even American citizens of Japanese descent, with Americans who had been stuck in Japan and parts of Asia. Let me back up a bit. So Japan attacks Pearl Harbor, December 7th. Boom, war is declared, borders are being closed. There were a lot of Americans who were stuck in Japan and also parts of Asia that Japan controlled, so China, the Philippines, Singapore. The US government was under pressure, the State Department especially, to get these Americans back to America. These are civilians we're talking about. So, it were US businessmen who were stuck in Tokyo, let's say, a lot of missionary families, US missionary families were stuck in China. So somewhere along the line, it was decided to have this exchange. And the first exchange, I think, was on the up and up because there were a lot of Japanese nationals who were stuck in the US. So, and not only, embassy staff, but also Japanese businessmen and their families. But the problem, Mia, was that there were more Americans stuck in Asia than there were Japanese citizens stuck in the US. So somewhere along the lines, to make up that body count, somewhere along the lines, it was decided to throw in some Issei men and their families, and my mother's family was part of that deal. And this, a lot of people don't know. I think of it as the whole incarceration, the whole concentration camp, very ugly chapter in U.S. history. But as ugly as that was, this is an even uglier subchapter of that we were actually exchanging U.S. civilians. Like my mother, she was a U.S. civilian. She was born and raised in Hawaii, which at the time was a territory of the U.S. So by birth, she was a U.S. citizen. And then to call it that she was repatriated to Japan, really, I mean, my mother had never been to Japan, uh, and there's an even uglier subchapter to that subchapter in that there were a lot of Japanese Peruvians and other Japanese Latin Americans that were essentially kidnapped, brought to the U.S., to increase the body count, to make this exchange. This is something that a lot of people, a lot of historians don't know about this.
Mhm.
So I had to write about this, and I couldn't let this story die with my mother. So I wrote the book Two Nails, One Love, and that civilian exchange is part of the novel.
Mm.
Mm.
Well, I think it's so powerful and important that you did publish this novel because, as you say, it's such an atrocious piece of American history. But then, in terms of people who even know about Japanese American incarceration is are so small, and then even smaller this exchange of civilians. And so I think it's such an important novel to spread that education and make
Mm.
sure that the story is known. Because I think as you have pointed out in your articles, a lot of history is lost due to, you know, the US government trying to
Mhm.
cover things up, or and so it really is like our community, right, who's
Yeah.
going to keep these stories being told and passed on to future generations. So it can't have been an easy process, because I know you had to sort of like, you revisited what your mother and your family went
Mhm.
through, right, in the process of this. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's such an important novel.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Um, all right. I just saw that the Discover Nikkei account asked if there are any questions. So if folks have questions, you can put them in the chat. Um, but in the meantime, Alden, I wanted to ask a few rapid fire
Okay.
questions to
Okay.
you. They do this in every episode of
Mhm.
Nima Voices. So I'll just go through them pretty quickly. You're taking a sip of water.
Yeah.
Okay, so who is your Nikkei hero?
Okay, Mia, I know this is going to sound corny, and I'm sorry, but my parents, yeah, I
Not
just, I mean,
not
really,
corny at all. Yeah, I think that's so
truly,
wonderful.
they, yeah, I mean, yeah, and in general, the Nisei generation and the Issei generation, I think, that all their sacrifices, all they endured, for us, and yeah, so yeah, sorry, corny answer.
No, don't apologize. That's a wonderful answer. What is your favorite Japanese slash Nikkei food?
Okay, so I of course love very good sashimi, chutoro, otoro, and all. But I gotta say, Mia, Japanese comfort food, so a donburi, like rice bowl, so probably katsu donburi. I think I love comfort food. Yeah,
Yeah, that can't be beat. I love it
yeah.
too. What is the Japanese value that has most influenced you?
I don't know if this is a value necessarily, but the saying "kodomo no tame ni," for the sake of the children, and this, as we've already talked about, my grandparents lived there, my parents lived there. I mean, everything for the children, for the next generation, And I gotta say, Mia, I am so proud and touched that I don't have kids, but my one of my brothers has two nephews that he and my sister-in-law raised to be such fine young men, and same thing, they raised them kodomo no tame ni, whatever, everything for the kids, good education, and you know that upbringing, and it's not only my brother. I mean, I look at a lot of my Sansei cousins, Sansei friends across the board. That's how they're raising their kids, the way they were raised by the Nisei generation, and the way the Nisei, were raised by the Issei. And I'm also seeing it now, among the Yonsei, and the way they're raising the Gosei generation is just a beautiful, beautiful value that is being passed down. And I think you know how much your parents sacrificed for you to have more opportunities than they did. So of course you want that for your kids, and that's you're part of that chain that's the legacy of it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. All right, and last but not least, what do
Yeah.
you like most about Discover Nikkei?
I, from the very first time that I became acquainted with the site, I love just the variety of article, the variety of voices, and the diversity. And yeah, my first article was about being a gay Japanese American, and it was accepted right away, and no questions about. I don't think it was accepted right away that, oh, this is an important voice that we should publish. And it's not just LGBT Q voices, but a lot of it geographically, a lot of articles are from Latin America. I knew nothing about Japanese Brazilians. I didn't even know that the highest population of ethnic Japanese outside of Japan is not in the US, it's in Brazil. I didn't even know that, and and now to see articles in Discover Nikkei about this Japanese Brazilian, our sister community there, that I knew nothing about. Also the articles about the Japanese Peruvians. Yeah, it's just I love that all the diversity of voices is being embraced, because this is a very rich tapestry, this whole Nikkei tapestry. Yeah. Um, and there are differences between Hawaii Japanese Americans and mainland Japanese. I mean, it's just and within Hawaii there are differences between those who are in Maui versus on Oahu and Honolulu, and all of those voices. That if you submit an article, that it's like, yeah, they'll publish it. They want to hear from all the voices.
Yeah, and thank you so much to you for contributing to those voices.
Mhm.
We do have a question in the chat from Ninja Turtle Mario, and they say, it's about Two Nails, One Love, Alden's novel. Did channeling personal experiences through Ethan bring about a better understanding of your own identity? If so, how would you recommend others try something similar? And then they also said, P.S. Thank you for sharing the story about your father's speech.
Oh, yeah, it did. But I gotta say, more so, Mia, writing that book made me understand my mother better. And anytime you write a novel, uh, and this was my first novel, and to do it today, I would do it differently, and I think it would be better. But even though it was my first novel, I did learn a lot about it. And when you write a novel, when you're writing fiction, you have got to put yourself in your characters' mind, and just, what was she thinking? How would she have felt there? How and and so I just had this great, so much more empathy for my mother and what she went through during World War II. I just, trying to put myself in her position. Oh, and actually, one of the reasons I ended up doing it as fiction is that my mother was 16 when she was sent to Rome. And I realized when I was writing first as nonfiction, and I realized, oh, I can't do it, I'll do it as fiction. I realized that I couldn't write her as a 16-year-old. I couldn't write her in a teenage girl's voice. And it was something I read, somebody else had written about this Nisei mother who had 3 daughters, teenage daughters, that were being sent to camp. I think it was Manzanar. And, you could only bring what you could carry. One of her suitcases was filled with sanitary napkins for her teenage daughters, because she didn't know. They didn't know where they were going to go. They didn't know, if they would have that type of toiletry supplies and all. And that was her one, her big concern was that her daughters have this, that her daughters not be embarrassed, to not have sanitary napkins. So this, of course, made me think of my mother being 16-year-old and, and going to Arkansas. Yeah, I just couldn't write that. I couldn't empathize enough. I couldn't put myself in, as a teenage girl going through puberty, going through those showers that are open, and so I I made the decision, I have to do this as fiction, and I made the mother character, I pushed her age back to, I think she's 6 in the novel, because, to me, I think, write a more authentic 6-year-old girl voice, than a 16-year-old teenage girl's voice. Because I think, 6-year-old girls are more similar to 6-year-old boys, versus 16-year-old girls versus 16-year-old boys, So I did that. But yeah, writing that novel just made me understand my mother so much. But the bad thing is, I wrote it after she passed. So, I couldn't ask her the millions of questions that I ended up having, when I wrote the book. So thank you for that question, by the way. Yeah. Very insightful question.
Yeah. Well, Alden, I want to thank you so much for joining me in conversation today for Nima Voices. And for folks who are watching, you can read Alden's articles on Discover Nikkei. There is a link in the live chat as well as the video description. And before we wrap up, Alden, did you want to share any current or upcoming projects that you're working on?
Um, yeah, so I I have ideas for novels, but I needed a break from the long form. So I've been working on a collection of short stories. I've written about five. I was fortunate enough that two have already been published. One in the Baltimore Review, and another in the Gordon Square Review, and another story is going to be published this fall in the Bamboo Ridge Press in Honolulu. Yeah, so I'm halfway done. These stories are all about the Nikkei experience. And yeah, I just got to finish maybe five, six more, and I want to publish the collection. And then I think I'll be ready to return to the novel form.
Oh,
We'll see.
wow.
Yeah,
That's exciting. I can't wait to see your collection and your
yeah,
next novel as well. And then I just wanted to share with everyone about the Okaeri
yeah.
conference coming up this fall. So as I mentioned, Okaeri is a Nikkei LGBTQ plus community, and we have a conference every other year. So this year we are throwing a hybrid conference for the very first time. So we'll have in-person programming happening at the Japanese American National Museum in Los Angeles. And then our online program, we hope that you can join from wherever you are. And it's going to be November 10th through 12th. And then I also wanted to share about some more virtual programs that Discover Nikkei has planned. So please save the date for the next Nima Voices episode, and that will be on October 4th. The guest host will be Sherry Kajiwara, who is the director of the Nikkei National Museum and Cultural Center in Burnaby, British Columbia. And they'll be chatting with Michael Kenji Abe, a Canadian Sansei, about growing up in Ontario, Canada,
Wow.
his father's family's experiences during World War II, living in Japan, and the Past Wrongs, Future Choices, and Landscapes of Injustice projects. And then for poetry lovers, join Discover Nikkei on August 24th for Nikkei Uncovered 4. And this poetry reading will be led by Tracy Kato Kiriyama, who curates the monthly Nikkei Uncovered poetry column for Discover Nikkei. And you can check out the website in July for more details. And then finally, Discover Nikkei would love to hear from you. Contact them at editor@discovernikkei.org with your feedback and suggestions for future episodes and programs. And one last time, thank you so much, Alden,
Oh,
for
thank you,
chatting with me
Mia.
today.
Thank you. Gosh, yeah, you. It wasn't like herding cats, but one cat, I guess. And you,
No, you're so easy to talk to, and I know we could keep going forever and ever. We didn't even get to talk about our mutual love of music,
oh yeah,
so we'll have to get to that another time. But
yeah.
have a great
Thank you.
evening,
Thank
everyone,
you. Yeah,
and thank you for joining.
yeah.